Hi, I want to welcome everybody to the Parrot Club's October 2025 meeting. And tonight we're having Dr. Donald Brightsmith talk to us about naturalized parrots. Is the sky really falling? And Dr. Brightsmith is an associate professor of ecosystem health in the Department of Veterinary Pathobiology and at Schubot Avian Health Center at Texas A&M University. He holds a Ph.D. in zoology from Duke University, a master's degree in wildlife ecology from the University of Arizona, and a BS in natural resources from Cornell University, and is the author of over 75 scholarly works. His interest in wild birds started at a young age with binoculars in the backyard and has led him to projects, collaborations, and teaching in Peru, Costa Rica, Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Indonesia, and throughout the U.S. His specialties are tropical ecology, ornithology, and wildlife conservation, especially topics related to wild and captive parrots. He has worked on parrots in Peru since 1993 and ran the Tambopata Macaw Project, now called the Macaw Society, since 1999. His research has focused on a wide variety of topics, including parrot conservation, clay-lick use, nesting, movements, habitat use, etc. He also conducts research on the diets of captive and wild parrots, parrot enrichment, and wild red-crowned parrots in Texas. As an advisor to government and private parrot conservation projects, he is helping put his knowledge to work for the benefits of wild parrots. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Brightsmith.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation this evening. So my very first talk I gave to a parrot group was at the Long Island Parrot Society as a native of West Hempstead in Nassau County in New York. And my parents were there. They were all worried because everybody was being noisy around the edges. And they said, there's no way he'll get through. But I survived and have given many, many talks since then. But certainly remember my first Long Island Parrot Society talk. They said there might be some members here this evening, so thought I would share that. And I'm willing to chat again. I still have siblings on the island. So my other family members are in upstate New York, closer to the Cornell and that part of the state. So, okay, so tonight I'm going to talk to you about an interesting study that I've looked at. And this one's a bit intense, I'll agree, but we'll make it light, we'll make it fun, and you can ask questions, just raise your hand, or just better yet, there's not many of us, just unmute and say, what was that supposed to mean? Let's take it from here. So I've got Simon Kais is a grad student who worked on a lot of this stuff, and he was a co-author on this as well. So first, if you're interested in this topic, this is... Wow, this is really confusing. Sorry, I have the wrong things in the wrong places. Here we go. This is based on a chapter out of a book. And the book is actually quite interesting. It's called Naturalized Parrots, Distribution, Ecology, and Impacts of the World's Most Colorful Colonizers. And it really goes through discussing a lot of information about parrots that are living outside their native ranges throughout the world. And Simon and I wrote a couple chapters in this, and we're going to go through some of that today. So that's out of Princeton University Press. So parrots are naturalized all over the world. There's no records from the gray countries, but the remaining countries have got quite a few species of parrots that have that are out there flying around. Naturalized means established, means that they're breeding. And as you can see, US probably has somewhere between 10 and 20 species, making it one of the species, the areas with the largest number. And I know throughout Latin America, there are a lot of parrots that are naturalized in places like Lima, Peru. My wife was just in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So lots of places there. But there are two species that are really successful, with over 40 populations of each. The ringneck parakeet, which we don't have so much in the US, don't have any idea why that's the case. And then the monk or Quaker parakeets, which a lot of you have seen, maybe in Brooklyn, maybe on Long Island, up in Connecticut, there's a few, and of course Chicago, and then head south, and they're all over the place. So most parrot introductions are from birds that were moved for the pet trade. And then this is coming out of most of the data parts I'll be talking about have come straight out of the book, or out of some of my own work as well. There are 290 introductions with known causes, and 80% of them were related to the direct pet trade. And parrots are common out in the wild in parts of the United States. When you look at eBird and the Christmas bird counts, which are two real popular online databases for bird sightings, they're logging over 100, and this is from a few years ago, 120,000 observations total of 56 species across 43 states. So we're not talking about something that's only in other places. This is something that is really wide throughout the United States. And not a big surprise to any of you, I'd imagine Florida, California, and Texas are the top sites for parrot sightings, with 25 breeding species across 23 states as well. So again, not just 2 species, not just a couple states. As you can see here, parrot diversity is highest throughout the southern states. As you get down into Miami-Dade County, I don't know if anybody's out in your group has ever gone kind of parrot watching in the Miami area, but it's fun. I mean, it starts to feel tropical. I was even at a conference one time, and they had a nice lake out behind the conference area in Miami. I walked out, there was a palm tree that was dead that looked just like the palm trees I work with in Peru. So I knocked on the side of it, and a blue and gold macaw flew out. It had been nesting in that site, and I didn't even know. I just like, wow, that looks like a parrot nest, and sure enough. You can also see the Los Angeles area is a real hot spot. Brownsville as well, and the southern tips of Texas, but then it's South Florida. That's the real winner. With a maximum of 36 species recorded in Dade County, Florida. I mean, that's just fun. For the US, monk parakeet is the most common species. Yep, a bunch of them clustered around there in the tri-state area where you guys are. First established in the 1960s, with breeding populations established in 21 states nationwide. And parrots have been introduced globally since about the 1600s, but of course, as transportation got easier, lots and lots more of them became established. 3,500 records of parrot introductions up through 2003. The oldest was the shining parrot, introduced to Tonga in the 1616. So that's would be in around the 1700s there. Pretty far back, people moving parrots around. However, post-1990, globally, the number of parrots being released into the wild and actually getting established has really dropped quite a bit, with the 60s, 70s, and 80s kind of the heyday for when they were happening. And one of the big reasons potentially for this is the Wild Bird Conservation Act in the in the early 1990s made it so that wild-caught parrots could not be easily imported into the United States. And as you can see, the data from CITES importation dropped way off at that time. And since then, only a few parrots have come into the United States. And along with that, new parrot introduction dropped too. And one of the ways we could think about this so I do have a parrot in my house, a double yellowhead that we adopted. She's about, almost 27 years old now. But how many of you think that your parrot, the one you have in a cage right now, would just love being out there in the wilds, trying to fight it out with hawks and find their own food? Nobody to cover the cage at night, nobody cleaning up the poopy paper underneath them. I mean, most of your pets would not make good introduction candidates. However, when when wild-caught birds were being brought in, it was much easier to get a new population established. However, where parrot importations continue, introductions continue. For example, Mexico is a place that has been recently importing quite a few wild-caught parrots. And sure enough, monk parakeets have gotten established, and there are some other non-native species doing well there as well. Now this is where it starts to get interesting. Various naturalized populations have been targeted for control. Okay, somebody unmute and tell me, what does control mean in biospeak?
Kill.
There we go. That's the word. Usually it's 90% of the time it's kill. Sometimes they try to use reproduction issues or capture and put them into homes like yours or something like that. But for the most part, when people talk about controlling a non-native species, it's kill. So Indian ringneck parakeets have been targeted in Spain, the UK, Seychelles, New Zealand, and even Hawaii in the USA. Monk parakeets in the USA, in the UK, in Spain, rainbow lorikeets in New Zealand, mitrid parakeets in Hawaii. So these are all, just of the ones that I could come across, these are all populations that have been targeted for control. If you see this number in the top right here, there's areas like Madrid with almost 11,000 Indian ringnecks, Barcelona with over 6,000. So quite large numbers of birds. And this is where we actually have to get into a little bit of geopolitics, but don't worry, we won't be talking too close to home about scary stuff. But what drives decisions to remove naturalized parrots? So let's say monk parakeets in Connecticut, why would there be a decision to go after them, to actually stop ignoring them and go and have governments or others try and actually take them out? So I was asked to write this chapter, not because I like to go around being mean to parrots, but actually the opposite. The editor had decided that he knew the work of a lot of his colleagues, and he's like, most of these people don't really like parrots much and don't really like non-native parrots. So let's get Brightsmith in here. Maybe he can find something good to say about non-native parrots, or at least give them a fair shake. So I was brought in that way. And I decided I needed to take kind of a hard look at what was out there. And what I realized was there are real impacts, ecological, economic, and social. Has anybody in your group ever had a power outage? Probably. And now you may not know it, but it is possible that some of your lovely little monk parakeets could have caused a power outage, and that could have caused some trouble. So there are potential economic impacts. There are ecological impacts. Social is that people, hard for us to understand, but just don't want to have parrots flying around in their life. I don't get it, but hey, it's a possibility. And then there's this whole other thing, which is perceived impacts, where it's like, well, maybe they're doing this, or I saw one that might have been doing that. And this is where it starts to get fuzzy, and I kind of start to draw the line. I'm like, okay, really, guys? And those could be ecological and economic or social. The problem I have is that even a lot of my colleagues who are scientists are often mixing these up in their scientific writing, saying, hey, we need to get rid of these birds because X, Y, and Z. But when you boil down X, Y, and Z, it's like, hey, which of those really happen and which of those are you saying could happen? So that was kind of the mentality I went in with. And the other issue is campaigns that fully eliminate naturalized parrots are rare. Grand Canary Island, ringneck parakeets, they managed to get rid of them. The Seychelles Islands, they managed to get rid of them. But notice both of those are islands, and rather small islands. And that's usually where they're more successful. But usually these campaigns that eliminate populations originate with complaints from local people. So they actually come from the locals. The people are open and communicate. They involve the local people and supported by the local people. However, many parrot eradication campaigns are costly, unpopular, and don't eliminate species. Just out of curiosity, I don't know your local area recently. Have there been any campaigns to take out monk parakeets, or have they been well received in your area?
No, back in, it was about 15 years ago, maybe, we had an eradication campaign by one of our electric companies. We were out there demonstrating. We built artificial nests. It blew up in their faces and ended up they did kill a bunch. It ended up costing them something like $1,000 per parrot to kill them, and there was huge uproar.
Okay.
And they backed off, and nobody has touched a Quaker in Connecticut since that time.
Okay, that's really good to know. And that fits right in with what we're about to talk about. So thank you. And for those of you who aren't familiar with your case study, maybe you can ask Amy for some more details later on, but that sounds perfect. And Amy, if there's any information from that time that you wanted to share with me at some point, that would be great.
Actually,
So
there'll be an article about it from Foster Parrots later this year. They're doing an article about us, and that's how we first met Foster Parrots. And there'll be a whole article about the origins of and what occurred in that
perfect.
horrendous time period.
Please send that to me at some point. I would appreciate seeing it. Okay, so many of the parrot campaigns are costly, $1,000 a bird, I just heard, unpopular, protesting out in front of nests, and don't eliminate species, and they're still there. So thanks for, I'll pay you later for feeding right into my slide. And even I've read, managers are sometimes trying to hide their actions from local people, and now all of a sudden there's somebody out in your backyard trying to catch the parrots or knocking down the nests. That doesn't make people happy. This causes backlash that can impede, or in your case, even terminate the projects. Some residents in the northeastern United States, I think this was specifically out of New York, identified with the birds as both our immigrant communities. So that's another way that sometimes these things get looked at. And local people can take action against campaigns. There you go. Not allow crews on their land, challenge removals in court, sponsor legislation, or just get out there and protest and make it blow up in their face. I love that one. This was out of the UK. Is there really space on our hate list for parakeets? However, fears of naturalized parrots can drive restrictions on parrot ownership. So this was the legal status of the monk parakeet in 2019. Connecticut is in red, New York is in yellow. Texas, of course, allows you to own almost anything. And now, so that's the reality. But then let's take this back into the literature. And the question becomes, how large is the threat to biodiversity from naturalized species? And you can drop into naturalized species from monk parakeets in Connecticut, for example. And there really are two views in the literature. And there's what I like to call the high impact perspective, which in science speak we'll probably talk about the precautionary perspective. And then there's this lower and variable impact perspective, which we call the mitigation perspective. And let's see what these actually mean. Okay, if you come from the high impact or precautionary perspective, then if that's your camp, then non-native species of many types threaten biodiversity. They're reported to be the number 2 threat to ecosystems globally. The only thing that's bigger is habitat loss, and it's likely to have greater impacts than hunting and poaching combined. On islands, it's reported to be the number 1 threat to biodiversity. And this is true. There's a lot of data to back up a lot of what's being said here. However, when we get to the bottom line, the driving management perspective is anything that's not native should be targeted for removal as a precaution, because this is the precautionary perspective. Kill them now so they don't get worse later. And that's really a common mentality when dealing with non-native species. For example, your power company saying they're non-native, we've seen some issues, let's get rid of all of them before there are more of them. But then there's a variable impacts, or what we call the mitigation perspective. And this is much more the camp that I'm in. Many reported impacts are backed up by little scientific evidence. Naturalized species are often an inevitable consequence of globalization. If animals of all sorts are being moved around the world on purpose or by accident, non-native species are going to get out there. And the driving management perspective is we should only control invasive species that are really causing trouble. If they're having big impacts socially, big impacts economically, ecologically, then we should put them on the table as something that might be worth working against. Now, there is a third perspective, and some of the people in this audience certainly might be in there, and that's kind of an animal rights perspective, where there is no call for hurting these animals. They're out there, they're living their lives. It's not their fault that they're there, and no control should be done on invasives. There are some scientists who espouse that, and of course, certainly many people in other areas as well. And I understand that perspective, but I will say that if you push me on it, I'm probably in a mitigation perspective mindset usually. So so that kind of gives us an idea of where different people are coming from and how we might want to look at this. But what scientific reviews have been done on the impacts? Most of the people who've been writing reviews are the high impact guys. And their starting point is that non-native species are bad and should be controlled. And it's really interesting because a lot of the guys who wrote these reviews are also the ones who are trying to get funding that was tied to kind of the control of parrots. So in Europe, they had a big group of funding that came out in order to help control the parakeets. And sure enough, a lot of the people who wrote about it were kind of in favor of controlling the parakeets. But what kind of irks me is that the results aren't really put in context. They're not usually compared to other threats. Financial costs are not compared to profit. So it gets kind of awkward. But let's see what we found. Previous reviews suggest very large impacts. But these previous reviews really mix things up, like I was talking about before. The confirmed impacts, which are the ones, yeah, we have to really worry about. If your parakeets are constantly knocking out the power to your hospitals, then we got a problem. And then there's the probable and possible impacts. Well, you know, they could nest on them. They are nesting on power poles. Sometimes things are getting knocked out that could impact your hospital. Okay. And then there's the theoretically but unlikely impacts, where they say they could possibly cause the whole system to short out and knock out the entire state of Connecticut's power supply. Like, yeah, well, that seems pretty speculative. And most of these reviews suggest parrots have a large negative impact on ecosystems, on economy, on human well-being. And sometimes they get really wrapped up in how bad they say these things are. But what's scary to me is once somebody writes it in the scientific literature, that can seep into the national level dialogue or state level dialogue and start to back up people's decisions to make management decisions. So the previous conclusion, naturalized parakeets have begun to exert serious problems to native environments, wildlife, and humans. Menchetti et al., he's one of the authors who really writes from a precautionary perspective. So I decided to get in there, conduct a more balanced review, see what I could come up with. I didn't start with the assumption that they're having large negative impacts. I like parrots. I focused on confirmed and probable impacts and looked at all the scientific literature I could find. Ended up reading about 250 papers, which was not necessarily my favorite activity. And I didn't really give a lot of weight to things that were possible or unlikely or theoretically could happen. So what did I do? I looked to see, well, are they really impacting the populations of species? Now, if a parakeet scares off a cardinal from a bird feeder, that's not going to cause the cardinal populations to crash. Let's actually see if there's a bigger impact than that. And then I always tried to provide some context. How does this compare to other things that are happening in our world? So we looked for 5 different types of ecological impacts: competition, disease transmission, hybridization, herbivory, where they're killing plants, and other things. So competition. Parrots may be competing for food and nest sites. Competition is most likely for the nesting cavities and food, especially your ringnecks. And lots of people have studied this topic. Although many studies document fights at bird feeders, nobody's been able to show that just because they get beat up at a bird feeder means that their populations go down. So just no evidence there. The biggest impact that I was able to find globally of a parrot on a species is this one. Ringneck parakeets displace bats in Europe. The greater noctule bat, which are these big monster bats, live in urban parks in Spain, in different parts of Spain, and the parakeets apparently are able to remove the bats from the tree cavities and sometimes even kill them. And some of the bat populations have declined by up to 80%. So that to me was a real impact, and it was having an ecological impact. There was a little one. They apparently compete with Eurasian nuthatches. A 10% reduction in one place in Belgium, nothing similar in the UK. Yeah, not much going on. And then there's owls, kestrels, sparrows, also compete with nest sites, but no real population impacts have been found. So when we look across Europe, where there's just thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of ringneck parakeets, we found one species that, in fact, is probably having some problems, and a few others that are maybe less happy with the parakeets flying around. But then we have the ringneck parakeets may have contributed to decline of echo parakeets. Echo parakeet is the one that's found on Mauritius, highly endangered species. But the main reason for the decline of the echo parakeet is the loss of habitat. But many years ago, 1886, ringneck parakeets were introduced to the island, and there's competition for cavities that may have contributed to decline, but again, the evidence isn't very convincing. If you ever read an article about non-native parrots, 8 times out of 10, somewhere it's going to say they are a threat to human and animal health because they're transporting diseases. And I don't know, that's the one that just drives me nuts, especially when they start to say that it's about human disease. Documented evidence of disease spread is rare. Some pigeons in Europe have mites that may have come from monk parakeets. They're pigeons too, which means they're not even native. One bald eagle chick died from chlamydia in a nest where monk parakeets were nesting in the bottom of the nest. There's more than one way to get chlamydia. No population impacts have been detected. So when this happens, and a newspaper article that's trying to back up removal of parakeets from power poles in Connecticut tries to say that it's a threat to human health, it's a really hard sell. Beak and feather disease in ringneck parakeets, it's found in both native and naturalized populations. There was an echo parakeet outbreak in Mauritius that could have been linked to ringneck parakeets. But then again, it actually could have been picked up in captivity because the people in captivity mixed birds. So it wasn't actually, may not have been picked up out in the wild. And this is a concern though. We don't want beak and feather to get picked up by the lesser Vasa parrot, which is also native on the Seychelles. So if you're moving birds around, if these non-native populations have diseases like beak and feather, okay, maybe that's a concern, especially if you're talking about endemic and rare parrots that are native in the area. But no matter how hard I looked, and I still haven't found any evidence since then, naturalized parrots have never spread disease to humans. There's no evidence that any single person has caught a disease from a naturalized parrot population. Now, this doesn't count taking them into your home, kissing on them, rubbing them, cleaning up their poop. That's a different world. But as far as a parakeet that's up there in a tree or on a power pole, chances of you getting disease from them is very, very low. So it's possible that some disease or parasites from naturalized parrots have occurred. No populations decline, super uncommon. Then there's no evidence that people have gotten disease from naturalized parrots. This is another weird one, though. We're going to switch gears now and talk about hybridizing. I imagine most of you, if you've been around the parrot world for a while, have seen some sort of interesting hybrid out there in captivity. So you know many parrots can hybridize. And when you have native wild populations, hybridization can start to mess with them and reduce or even eliminate certain species through hybridization. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the black ducks and mallard ducks up in your part of the world, but it's getting harder and harder to find full black ducks because they keep hybridizing with mallards. So it could be a problem in parrots as well. This is some sort of weird yellow crowned, red crowned hybrid that my grad student found in, oh, there it is, lilac-crowned, probably with Oratrix, with a double yellowhead. So down in South Texas, there are red-crowned Amazons flying around that probably were brought in as pet birds, but they're hybridizing with red lords, lilac-crowns, and yellow-headeds. So because they're considered native by the state of Texas, because they don't live very far from the native range, we think that this hybridization issue could be causing some problems genetically for these species. Outside the native, most of the hybridization we found, though, is with other non-native parrots. So again, not a real huge issue going on here. So there's no evidence, again, that naturalized parrots have had a real impact on truly native parrot populations. Okay. Naturalized parrots, they're not having impact on native plants or ecosystem structure. They like to chew and strip branches in some areas. I think you know that. But the impacts have been minimal up until now. So when we boil all the hysteria about ecological concerns with parrots down, we find greater nocturnal bats in Spain, maybe something with the echoes, and a little bit of annoyance to the nuthatches in Europe. And that's all I could find globally. No other parrot populations of naturalized parrots confirm negative impacts with 50 species in hundreds of populations. Now, I will say on some of these small islands with rare endemic parrots may be at higher risk. No impacts confirmed, but I think that we should be cautious when talking about things like Seychelles, Vasa parrots, Puerto Rican Amazons, Uvea parakeet, etc. It's probably best to keep the non-native parrots off these little islands. But then this is the coolest part that I got to really understand by looking at this project. Most naturalized parrots inhabit strictly urban and suburban environments. If they're only in urban and suburban areas, most of the time, they're not going to be interacting with endangered species because most of your endangered species aren't living out in the middle of town. And these are some great photos of showing the background of San Francisco and other places. Naturalized parrots have had relatively few impacts on native species. So let's just remember I was talking about putting things in context. 1,300 species of birds and mammals are threatened by invasive species or non-native species. We found population impacts on only about 3 species, only 2 of which are threatened. So that means those naturalized parrots are causing 0.15% of the threat from non-native species. Not so big. That's pretty small. So when they try and tell you that they're going to hurt endangered species, 0.15%, there's a lot of other things that we can worry about first. Okay, any questions up to there? Sounds good. Okay, let's talk about economics. We searched the litter for confirmed economic impacts. What do we find? Agricultural losses, electrical infrastructure damage, building damage, and airplane collisions, all sorts of reasons to hate parakeets. So let's talk about it in detail. Parrots' damage to agriculture has been widely reported, but mostly from areas where parrots are native. There's very little documented evidence for naturalized areas, and the claims are often exaggerated, and the true costs are rarely estimated. And what they like to do is they say, in their native range, they're a horrible agricultural pest. Therefore, here, we're in trouble. Well, let's see if that holds up. Monk parakeets and ringneck parakeets do some agricultural damage. Orchards in Florida, $15,000 loss. Corn crops in Barcelona, up to 30% loss. Orchards, tomatoes. Ringneck parakeets, grape vineyards in the UK. Pick your own farm in the UK. Dates in Israel. And most recently, which I don't think is in here, there were some pretty serious sounding impacts in Hawaii on local farmers. Here it is. Okay. About 10,000 live on Kauai. Estimated 2 million damage in damage to corn, thousands of damage to small local farmers. And now an interesting thing is that the local people and large industry are complaining. When the researchers tried to go out and study the question, they said, why are you studying them? You go start killing them. But what was odd about this is there really was no quantification of damage. We heard a lot of people complaining, and as you may know, parrots are noisy. I don't know if any of you are aware of that fact. But when they're out there in your backyard attacking your fruit tree, it's very easy to tell they're there, but it's a lot harder to watch the parrot, the pigeons, and the blackbirds, etc., that may make less noise. But there is a control campaign underway in Hawaii, sorry. But when we looked at it, we found less than 10 cases globally of published agricultural damage by naturalized parrots. That's not many. No damage was done to large-scale industrial agriculture. The idea coming out of Chicago was that these monk parakeets were going to invade the corn belt. They were going to raise the corn crops, and we were all going to starve because the monk parakeets were going to eat all the corn. And most of the damage was small scale. Most losses were 3,000 to 15,000. A couple unquantified ones apparently were more, but with the way this topic has been exaggerated for so long, it's really hard to tell. But what was really cool when I looked at this was all the agricultural damage was near suburban areas. Remember I said that monk parakeets and non-native parrots almost are always in cities? Well, guess what? When they attack agriculture, they do it when the agriculture is in or immediately adjacent to the city. And that's where they're actually having impacts. And I realized they don't fly 50 miles out into the middle of a cornfield, settle down, eat the cornfield, and fly home. They just do little short trips. So when we think about agriculture, it's almost always right next to your cities with populations of them. Okay, infrastructure damage. This is where we start to hit home in Connecticut, Long Island, etc. Monk parakeets make nests on electrical infrastructures. I hope you've gone out on a field trips to see it, because I sure like watching these guys buzzing around their nests. These can cause fires that result in power outages. Nesting and damage is common in most parts of the US where they occur: Florida, Connecticut, Texas, Illinois, New York, etc. In some areas, and this really weirded me out, monk parakeets don't nest on electrical systems at all. They're all over Spain, they're in Israel, and they're in Puerto Rico, and they don't use electrical infrastructure, and I have never seen any reason for why that is. So totally confusing to me. Okay, checking the literature, what did I find? 1,000 outages and removing 90 nests in Florida cost $500,000 a year. Cost of removing nests in Florida from another study, up to $1 million a year. Cost of removing nests in Connecticut, $70,000. So this may actually be some of the information. The timing is right. This may be information that came out of what you were talking about. And then 18 fires caused by parakeets in New York, but with the cost not quantified. Okay, how bad is that when we put it into perspective? The authors of the articles don't actually estimate the damage to infrastructure from other sources or the overall maintenance costs, like squirrels that chew on electrical wires. And none of these reports actually reported annual profits of any of the companies involved. However, we did find some financial reports. We found $500,000 damage is in highly impacted parts of Florida. And in that exact same area, we found annual profits at the order of $871 million in just profit. So that was a drop in earnings of about 0.067%. So we're half of what my percentage was last time, which is about 15 cents a share. So when we think about it in that way, is this public enemy number one from an economics perspective in the worst part of Florida, where it was having the largest amount of impact on the electrical infrastructure? Kind of hard to say that this is public enemy number one. If we put things in perspective, summing all of the damage in the US from the literature, 1.6 million per year nationwide for parakeets, out of a total cost of $120 billion from non-native species. Rats, 19 billion, cats, 17 billion, feral pigs, 800 million. Parakeets responsible, oh my percentages keep getting smaller. Pretty soon I'm not going to be able to see them anymore. Parakeets are responsible for 0.0013% of total damage caused by invasive species in the United States. So when you start looking at these arguments that people are making about how bad they are, the percentages just keep getting smaller and smaller. We go to the UK. Economic damage is small compared to other invasive species. Here we are again now, parakeets in the UK at 0.0048% of all damage from non-native species. Social impacts. Any questions on the money? Okay. Not ready to load up your shotgun and go out and take care of your parakeets in the backyard? Not there yet? I'll have to keep trying harder then. Okay, negative social impacts. Power outages, noise, feces, damage to backyard fruits, unpopular with some residents. Again, hard for, I just wish we had monk parakeets in College Station so I could study them and enjoy them, but we don't. Positive social impacts. Some people just love parrots. Raise your hand if you love parrots. Anybody out there? Nobody? Okay, sounds good. I saw 3 out of 3, no other cameras on, so I'll take that as a win. The problem, they are relatively easy to see. And actually, a number of people have been talking about the ability of parrots to connect people with nature. Sure, they may not be native in your areas, but you know, a bright green, noisy bird coming to a bird feeder can really catch your eye. And as you mentioned, some people often fight to protect their local parrot populations because they really enjoy having them around. So is the sky falling? Usually not. One of the most important things that I can say to you is most naturalized parrots living in urban areas have little to no negative impacts on the ecosystems or human society. They just don't get out there. They just don't leave town. They don't go into where your most endangered species are living, and they're not messing up the ecosystems there. Almost all impacts globally are by monks and ringneck parakeets. So if it's not one of those two, the chances that there's a problem is almost none. And almost all of these parakeet populations are still not having much impact. So when are you likely to have a negative ecological impact? Endangered cavity nesting species in urban areas, we've got a potential problem there. If naturalized parrots spread beyond urban areas, which they almost haven't, as far as I've been able to see. And of course, if we have island areas with endangered native parrot species, we got to be careful. And that's a place where, yeah, we have to think about hybridization, disease spread, and competition, because these are where they can actually cause problems. And ringneck parakeets are the most likely to cause damage. If you have a breeding colony, don't let them escape, because we probably don't need more ringnecks flying around in the US. We haven't had many yet. But when we think about it, should naturalized parrots, like your monk parakeets, be controlled to reduce the economic impacts? Agriculture near urban areas and electrical infrastructure can be at risk, but most of the costs are so low compared to the total impacts and to the total cost or the income, and impacts from other species are usually so much more common. Monk parakeets are the most economically damaging in the USA, so we do want to minimize releases and escapes. But the big problem is, if anybody is ever talking to you about controlling parakeets again, what's the economic cost? What's the cost of control? If the cost of control is so much more than the cost of damage, is the control a good idea? And probably not. If they're making an economic argument, they better make a good economic argument if they even want to have a start. ecological and economic impacts of naturalized parrots really look to be so much less than previously suggested. The economic costs are low. Once you put them in they sound big. $500,000 is a lot of money. I don't have $500,000 laying around. But then again, if I just made $587 million, then yeah, maybe I wouldn't worry so much about $500,000. Detailed and transparent cost-benefit analyses are needed. If somebody's talking about controlling non-native parrots, what are the real impacts? What are the costs? What's your probability of success if you try and do this? And factor in the Connecticut Parrot Society. Factor in the fact that there are people out there who really love these birds. Engage with them, talk with them, make it clear that there's a good reason, or give up and go home and leave the parrots alone. And when I look at this, and I'm raised in a wildlife, I have 2 degrees in wildlife management. So I don't come out this as from a complete bunny hugger perspective. I certainly don't. But when you look at these closely, a control campaign will very rarely be warranted if they take a good look at the economics and all the other impacts as well. Naturalized parrots and the future of aviculture. Most parrot introductions come from birds moved for the pet trade, and fear of parrots escaping and ravaging the landscape will continue. Aviculture may continue to be blamed for naturalized parrots, and this may continue to impact the ability to own birds in the US. So the reduction in imports was a very good way to reduce this risk. And owners need to prevent escapes and spread the message not to release birds, especially when you're talking about breeders who are a little more savvy, a little less interested in people. So if you don't want aviculture to get a bad name from this, spreading a message to not release birds is certainly good. And you, of course, can promote a more balanced evaluations of naturalized parrot risks and impacts now that you've heard this talk. But I have to admit, going out there and making some noise and saying, hey, I don't think this is a good idea, especially when they can't come back and really show you strong evidence as to why, seemed like a pretty reasonable thing to do. And if local removals are proposed in the future, get your real cost benefit analysis, look for ecological evidence to justify the removal, get broad input and participation from other local people. Or in the worst case scenario, you can call Don Brightsmith and see if he's got some time to talk with you and maybe meet with some of the people and try and evaluate what they're actually saying and see if any of their arguments really hold water. I used some information from this review in Wisconsin in August to help review the status among parakeets by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. They were considered illegal to breed, own, and sell, and the recommendation from the committee was still considered invasive, but pet ownership was allowed as new pets pose little risk. And they were actually pretty intelligent about it. They said they agreed with what I was saying early on, is that if you've got a pet that's been raised in a cage and loves people, et cetera, it's probably not going to go out there and start a whole new population. So a balanced view of the evidence helped create a more balanced regulations. Issue's complex, but most naturalized parrots are not a major threat in most areas. So we go back to my opening statement. Naturalized parrots have begun to exert serious problems to native environments, wildlife, and humans. I'm like, dude, no. I can't buy it. Instead, this was a quote from the editor of the book. Naturalized parrots have not lived up to the dire forecast of large-scale environmental and economic impacts. And I really think that that's where we are in the world we live in. And I'm happy about that, I will admit. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. And for more information, buy the book, Naturalized Parrots, Distribution Ecology and Impacts of the World's Most Colorful Colonizers. And I made up the back half of the title, which is the campy part, but that's okay. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I know this was a hard slog. There was a lot of information, a lot of numbers in there, But I hope you enjoyed it and at least took home some good take-home messages. So unmute if you want, go for it. It's always nicer to hear a clap than just see it.
Wonderful, wonderful. If you want to stop sharing, we can start taking questions. I think there are going to be a lot of them. I know I have a bunch of them.
I already saw Vicky's hand go up, so.
Yeah, so stop sharing your screen and then we
Oh,
can
I
get
did. Sorry, I did. I tried to and failed.
Okay, let me try from my
No, I
end.
got it. I got it.
Okay, there we go. Perfect. And yeah, I know I have a bunch of questions, so why don't we just get started?
Go ahead, Vicky.
One of the things we didn't touch on, and I think is a factor when they talk about non-native birds, especially in the northern part of the United States where it gets cold in winter, isn't there a percentage that they just aren't going to make it through a winter? I think this is more in the escape pet routine than massive amounts of birds being released in the wild. But I think we've been surprised at how well the monk parakeets have handled Connecticut winters.
Yeah, and I think the deal there is that they have the stick nests and they're willing to use them all year, so they don't lose toes like a lot of the other species would, because a lot of the other birds don't go back into cavities, so they'd have to have that mentality if they were going to stay warm in those Connecticut winters. But yeah, I think there are some special things about monk parakeets, especially if they're huddled up against an electric transformer.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I probably a lot of people in here are following the escapades of May the Budgie in Central Park, and whether or not she can last through the winter. I think if she, my personal feeling is, budgies, cockatiels, and a lot of the Australian birds come from areas where it can get very cold at night. And not to say that she's going to be able to survive if it's 10 degrees out and snowing, but there is the possibility she could, I think, if she was smart enough to find shelter. But there's no population of group of budgies out there that she's going to hook up with and start mating and produce
So
babies.
the issue with budgies is they've done spectacularly poorly throughout the world. There are very few budgie populations, even the one that was established in Florida for a while because they just dumped 1 million of them out there. Even that didn't persist. And there are some theories, but the one idea is it's harder for invasive species from small areas to invade big ones. And with Australia, the cockatiels haven't done well, the budgies haven't done well. So it could be deeper than that, but that was an interesting theory that I had heard proposed, and I went to try and check it on parrots, and it seemed to hold up pretty well. Lovebirds have gotten established in a couple places, but they're from a bigger area, so.
Arizona, they're doing well, and they've actually been outside of the urban areas, but there's so many cacti out there, so even when they take over certain cacti, I don't think there are any direct competition for like cactus wrens and
the other thing to think about when people start telling you they're outside the native areas is look at what scale. I mean, are we talking about 100 meters into the desert? Or are we talking about 20, 30 kilometers out where you're really in desert? Because I've seen them in Arizona, and yeah, you're in this really nice park and it's all native vegetation and they're nesting in there and it's kind of interesting. But then you turn around and it's all city behind you. So it's hard to say that they've gotten, and that was what was happening in Israel with the data that I finally logged. They're saying, yeah, they're out in agricultural areas. And when I actually saw dots on maps, I was like, yeah, they're 50 meters into the agricultural area, and behind you is all town. So.
Yeah, obviously, we all know that Southern California is overrun with a number of variety of species. I just wonder, I know that, a lot of them come from escapees from the pet trade, but there's still a substantial amount of parrot smuggling over the border, particularly over the California border. And I wonder if some of those parrots are still coming from the smuggling. So for example, someone comes over, they have a bunch of
Yeah,
parrots.
no, I understand.
They
The
see
evidence for the populations we've seen, mostly looking at Amazons right now, though, It's breeding. I mean, we did a good study. I have another whole talk I could give you next year on the parrots of South Texas, in which we found at sometimes of some years, 25% of the birds flying around in South Texas were young of the year that had just been hatched. So it's these populations in a lot of areas, Los Angeles, South Texas, South Florida, of the more common species, they're not being bolstered by new escapees. These are populations that are breeding. And now, yeah, when you've got these super rare species and a new one shows up, yeah, okay, it's probably somebody's pet escape. But most of these ones that are established, and I actually don't feel, and I don't have data on it, that there's that many birds coming across the border and then being chucked, being released.
Mm.
Now, what some of the aviculturists I know from years ago were saying was they would bring birds to the border, they'd put them into quarantine, and if nobody took them out of quarantine, apparently quarantine was letting birds go in the Rio Grande Valley. And that may be one of the ways why we have so many green parakeet, green conures, and Mexican redheads and red crowns down in the valley. But
Now, I do wonder with some of the Amazons that have taken over in Texas and California and Arizona and places, if any of those species going back hundreds of years, if any of them were in the US at that time, got extirpated from the US, came back here now as releases from the pet industry and have established populations again.
okay, so I've looked at that question. There's a little bit of evidence that red crowns could have made it up near the border, but there's almost no historical. The historical evidence is super rare, and we think that maybe a documented dozen may have come across the border in the 70s. So they may have been their native. They may have arrived on their own. Historically, there's no evidence that there were populations even when the first explorers came. In California, there's almost no chance. And the weird thing is, even though the vegetation is right on the border of what could support those parrots, the parrots in South Texas don't go to the native vegetation. They stay in town. So it's completely backwards from this kind of reestablishing in a niche where they were. They're using cities in South Texas. And it's so bad. I was driving through Venezuela with a colleague, and all of a sudden we drove into town, and there were severe macaws flying around in town. And I looked at my colleague, who's a good parrot scientist. I said, "These aren't native, are they?" I said, "These are ex pet trade birds or illegal trade birds." And she looked at me and she goes, "Yeah, you're right." Because it was just wrong. They were in the middle of the city flying around. I'm like, not native. And she's like, "Yep, you got it." So there's just they get like reprogrammed when they're taken from the wild, put in an urban environment. They get out in that urban environment, and it's like, because this was Venezuela with really good habitat up in the mountains surrounding them, and they stayed in town. So just strange stuff.
What about all those blue and gold macaws that we were constantly seeing videos of in towns? Are those native to those areas?
That's Caracas. That's Caracas, Venezuela is the most common place for them. Nope, those birds were pet trade birds, got brought into the middle of the city, got released. I have heard of one place where there's been an invasion of parrots into an urban area and they've stayed. It's Campo Grande, Brazil. It's the work by Neva Guedes. She's got blue and golds and chloropteris, green wings, that she says in a big drought found the city, came in and stayed. And she's a real great scientist, so I can't doubt her, but that's the only place in the world where they've really become urban, which is different than a few parrots coming in, landing in the trees in the edge of town. I mean, I see them around in places like Puerto Maldonado, et cetera. But when all of a sudden you get a large-bodied parrot living in the middle of the city, it's usually because somebody let them go there. So they become very different creatures once they're put in a city.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I would love to actually redo some of this study, but with the Latin American species, where like Rio de Janeiro, my wife and daughter were there visiting the city parks, and there's all sorts of parrots all over the city parks. But I know that some of those species for certain are not native. And I get the feeling, including turquoise fronted Amazon, the Amazona estiva, living right in cities. And I'd love to look at the difference in these behaviors between these birds who are native to the country and native perhaps to the surrounding environment, but have, I'm quite sure, have been put there. Their genetics are going to be different. Their behavior is going to be different. There's some really cool things going on with that. Anybody else have a question? I know we've been dominating here.
I know, I still have more questions, but yes, please jump in or raise your hand or just start talking or.
Otherwise, she's going to give me another question.
I will.
Go for it, Amy.
All right, the greater nocturnal bat. I mean, 80% of the population's being wiped out by the Indian ringnecks. What can be done about that? I mean,
okay. So starters, one of the cities had a big problem. And the problem with the greater nocturnal bat is that it really likes old trees in urban areas. So it is somewhat concentrated there. So that one is one that when my Spanish colleagues get up in arms about parakeets, if they're talking about that one, I've got to I have to give ground there. And that's where you go after the birds. You go after the parrots, and it's going to be the only thing that really works with that is lethal control. There's probably too many of them to put into houses like you guys, and they're all wild caught. So, and they're probably not legal to own anymore in country or move around because of all the problems. So there aren't good options there. Now,
but if you kill the parrots, won't others just move into the vacuum?
So the issue is, can you turn the tide on the population? And if you're going to go after it, you've got to go big, because you're right. You can't just trap them out of this or that local park, because others will move in from the surrounding environment. Until now, remember, they do live mostly in urban areas. So if you can take out a population in an urban area, they're not coming out of the landscape. So it's not like they're uniformly distributed throughout the entire landscape, and they're going to just continue to repopulate.
Now, Hawaii is the other issue. I mean, the ecosystem is so delicate there, and so many animals are endangered there, and so many invasive species have moved in that are killing off the native animals that, I do really worry about the population on Kauai and if it's affecting local birds and other animals.
What I think is happening with the parakeets in Kauai is that it's an agricultural issue. It's an agriculture issue. They still seem to be in urban and peri-urban areas. They're not getting up into native habitats. Native habitats and native birds are quite spatially isolated from a lot of the human inhabited parts of the island. And there's never been a discussion of impacts on native species or native vegetation that I've heard associated with that. It's that the local farmers are losing too much. They don't want them there, and they want them out. So where I respect that campaign is because it sounds, and again, I haven't been there, I haven't researched it, it sounds like it's coming from the local people who are saying, we don't want these birds here for this or that reason, as opposed to it being some sort of leader, a specific business or a specific set of leaders who are saying, we want these out over the objections of the local people.
It's difficult. These situations are very difficult. I mean, remember when the Lear's macaws, the few remaining Lear's macaws were eating all the corn, and despite being extremely endangered, they wanted to kill them. And they weren't even invasive. They were the local species, and they had to come out with different ways to do this, including reimbursing their losses. But Yeah, so I looked it up. It's actually this December will be the 20th anniversary of the monk parakeet slaughter here in Connecticut. And one of the things we did in conjunction with foster parrots is we designed an alternative nesting platform, and we only got to put a few up. It sort of petered out after a while, but people who lived near the transformers agreed to put these nesting platforms on their property, and the monks moved over. So
Oh, that's cool.
when the electrical company moved the nest and we put the platforms up, they just went and built nests. And I have photos of that. So mitigation techniques like that can work if people want to take the time to do it. My understanding since the slaughter occurred is because one of the things they were doing, they were trying to take nests down during breeding season and all that. And but they just decided very stealthily to, over a period of a few days, just massacre all the Quaker parrots, move all the nests. They were gathering the birds into kill chambers. USDA was there, and we got that all stopped. I mean, they did not like the negative publicity.
Right.
Since
They
that,
are a company.
yeah. So since that time, they have been trimming the nests and all that, but they have not killed any birds or I don't think they remove the nests. It's possible in some areas they remove them, but outside of breeding season.
Right.
So there really has been no issues. We have two major electrical companies. The other electrical company, which is actually responsible for most of the state, and also had Quaker nests in their neighborhoods, opted not to do it. So it was just this one company mostly in the New Hampshire
Interesting.
area. But
It would be cool to see a real economic analysis. I mean, I'm sure that they don't really want to do it and share it, but it would be cool to know.
We did know. We had the economic documents. It was not favorable at all to them. The other thing is we also uncovered internal documents at the time showing that actually most of the electrical outages and fires were due to squirrels, not to Quaker parrots.
I know that's the reality, but I haven't been able to find the numbers to say, look, when you stack up the squirrels versus the parrots, how is this gonna what's gonna
Yeah, it's
happen?
not clear why they decided to go after the Quakers, other than that their nests were just more obvious, and they're there in the big, and the Quakers are screaming, whereas the squirrels, I guess, were a little more stealthy about how they knock our power out. But
Yep.
I don't know how we got it. Somebody probably snuck it to us, but we had an internal document from the power company showing that the squirrels were causing the outages. So
Right.
we of course threw that in their face and gave it to the news stations and all that. It was an enormous thing at the time, but we prevailed. We prevailed. So
Right.
but the problem is Connecticut is still a state where it's illegal to own pet Quakers. We have a lot. There are several people on the Zoom who I won't call out by name who own Quaker parrots. Most of the vets will still see the Quakers and won't report you, but there's always the risk that somebody
Yeah.
report. We can take them out to bird fairs, or the people with Quakers are sort of living there on the margins. And if one of their Quakers got out, could it join one of the wild populations? Possibly,
Sure.
if it figured it out.
But
But
they're not gonna start new populations, and that's
no,
the
and we already have wild populations all over the state. I think they've made it up all the way up to the Massachusetts border and possibly north of it as global warming warms us up and the heat. But even so, I mean, we have populations all over Connecticut, and they have never been shown to cause any, other than the electrical stuff, but they don't cause any problems. They build their own nests, so they don't displace
Yeah.
any of the birds. They don't compete with anybody. Our friends at the Yale Ornithology Department at the time came out and told the press and the journalists and the press that they felt that the Quaker parrots, at least in Connecticut, were basically occupying the niche that the Carolina parakeets did. So
I don't know where they got that one from because that don't hold water, but I hear
yeah,
you.
it may have been a little bit more speculative, but they've never
Uh-huh.
caused any problems in Connecticut. We just don't know how to make them legal. With so many other pressing political issues,
Right.
that the legislature is probably not going to waste time on an issue like
Yeah.
this that affects so few people, but they need to be made legal, and we don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I hear you. So, yep, not. But if you get a strategy and you need a spokesperson, I could potentially. So,
Okay, that's good to know because it's it's like one of those all those laws that are crazy laws you always read about that are on the books. You can't spit into the sun, or in my town, it's actually illegal to have colored Christmas lights. You're only allowed to have white. Not that anyone follows that, but that's actually a law in the book in my town. So
pretty
uh,
funny.
it's just nobody gets together and overturns these laws. So
Got it. Oh wow, they're among parakeets now where I grew up. I just checked eBird and I didn't even know that. So that's pretty funny. Hempstead Lake State Park.
yeah, a lot of my family is from West Hempstead as well. So
Oh, that's really funny.
yeah. Does
Anyone
anybody
else?
have
Anyone else have a question?
somebody must have a question. Anybody want to ask any questions about the Quakers?
Or anything else? So on Thursday, I go to northern Mexico to go chasing maroon frontids and maybe some Amazons, maybe even a military macaw or two. So I'm looking forward to that.
Nice, nice. Well, the information you presented is good evidence that we can certainly use. Yeah, a lot of really great data. If anybody discusses with us about the issue of naturalized parrots being bad.
Okay, so I would strongly suggest if you do actually want to talk to people about it, please use the book chapter because I worked very hard and it's a very balanced account. That's my best work. What I say is, I mean, it's fine, and I'll back it up. But I may have been a little more exaggerated when talking to a parrot group. But my best work is that chapter, and I would suggest that chapter be what people cite when addressing
Okay.
this issue. So,
Why do you think ringneck parakeets have spread all over the world, but aren't a problem in the U.S.?
yeah, that one doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Um,
I mean, it's just weird because they're everywhere.
yeah, I mean, when you look across the world, so I'm just pulling them up in the US right now, and there's just a handful of sightings in eBird, a few of them around New York actually,
Really?
but nothing recent. And then some down in Florida. So there's a smattering of them, but then you look across to the UK, and it's just out of control.
Yeah, but the smattering of sightings here could just be lost
That's,
birds.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
I mean, there was a cockatiel in, I want to say Montana, I think,
Nice.
um, a few years back in eBird, but one cockatiel, that was just an escaped bird. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm a birder. Even here in Connecticut, they'll post to the bird list, oh, there's a budgie outside. I recorded it. No,
yeah.
don't record it. Go and get it because it's somebody's lost bird that's going to
Yeah.
die. Don't just be reporting it on your bird list.
But I do actually encourage people to report everything they see because otherwise, a lot of the problems with the history of naturalized parrots is that people would see a parrot flying around outside and they'd be like, oh, we're not going to report it because of whatever. And then you have trouble actually understanding the dynamics, the history, the current status, et cetera. So like Dade County has always reported on their Christmas counts all the parrots, but other areas just wouldn't. It's like, okay, that's not overly helpful. Let history decide what's relevant, important, native, non-native. But so
It's interesting when we're commenting what you said about Australian birds. I never really thought about it till you brought that up, that none of these naturalized parrot populations are Australian birds. They don't seem to adapt to other places, do they?
Unless it's cockatoos in Singapore, but Singapore or Hong Kong and Singapore, but those aren't exactly like real mainland areas with super competitive colonies of stuff. So it's
Well,
hard.
they actually have that's right. There's a cockatoo population there from one of the Indonesian islands, and there are more of that.
Yep.
The species is extremely endangered, and there are more of them
Got it.
than there are in the wild.
Yep.
Yeah, I forgot about them. But Singapore is close to Australia, though.
Yeah, and it's also an island. So
Right,
one island to another, a big island to a small island works.
right. But
and
they
I
really
would-
don't seem to do well outside of Australia. So it's interesting.
Cool.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I know I've been monopolizing the questions, but I've been waiting for other people to speak.
Lori's unmuted. I don't know if that means she wants to say something or if she's just unmuted.
Well, yeah, I can. I did order your book, by the way.
Great.
But back in 22, I went over to London for vacation and I made a special trip to the Kensington Gardens
Yep.
just to hunt out the Indian ringnecks, and I found them.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I went looking for them last time I was over in the UK and found a few flying around as well.
Yeah, I heard them before I saw them. So
Yeah. And Chris and I were in Barcelona, and we had no idea they were among parakeets. And all of a sudden we hear this sound, and we looked at each other and we're like, "Oh my God, there are parrots here!" And we looked, and up in the palm trees, sure enough. But we had absolutely no idea. But as you said, it's if you know parrots, it's unmistakable when you hear one.
Yep, something like that.
especially the monk parakeets. Yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So. Well, amazing information, amazing.
Yes.
We really thank you for coming. We'll be posting this, but there's just so much good information about this, and the information was very clearly laid out and presented all the arguments, which I think is great. And we will, of course, be making a donation to the Macaw Society.
Great.
Keep wanting to call it the Macaw Project. In fact, Chris, who's here, I know Chris has been to Tambopata. I've been down there, but to different clay licks at the Charlie Munn Center on the edge of Peru and Bolivia. And
Oh, right. That's a weird one. That one.
Yeah, and we went to other sites that were near Tambopata down there too. But anybody who has a chance to go down there and see the parrots on the clay lick, it's just the most incredible sight. I mean, you just can't believe what it actually looks like in person. I mean, you can see photos and videos, but if you see it in person, it's just an unbelievable sight. So
It is different, that's for certain. So
yeah, and the work you did in creating the Tambopata reserve there is just amazing work to help the parrots. So we all thank you for that as well.
you're
All
welcome.
right, I'm going to end the recording now.